Because it is a tough road. Once you open yourself up to the possibility that somebody in India is just as human as you are, and if you had been born there, you would believe their beliefs. Once you open yourself up to that possibility, then it's like, oh, I gotta take my worldview pretty lightly. I gotta hold it, with a bit of distance, because if I'd grown up anywhere else, I would also be gripping to it.
Let's turn our attention inward and explore the thoughts and emotions that shape our experiences and discover how to live with more awareness and intention. I'm David Dawson, and this is Interaction. And your beard is impressive. All those swirls is the density of your beard here.
I can tell I should have started with the eyes.
That's all right. You might lose where you are, and that's
Yep.
going to be a little bit more fun. Okay, you ready?
Yep.
You know what? Out of everyone that's done a drawing of me, by far that one is the least offensive.
That's funny.
And here's yours.
Amazing.
Not quite as, I look very bloated. So today's guest is someone that I have known of for probably 6 or 7 years, when I was seriously considering kind of transitioning out of the church full time instead of kind of being on the fence with certain things. And I really enjoyed what you've done. So my guest today is Jon Ogden. And we're going to get into all the details of what everything he's doing right now. But a brief little introduction, because I tend to forget to introduce people at the very beginning, is your work focuses on fostering personal growth, connection, and understanding across spiritual and philosophical perspectives. And for me, that resonates a lot with my own personality, where trying to find commonality rather than differences, and to try and find connection versus disconnection. And so I am really eager to get into the topic today, because I think a lot of people this is something that we're really yearning for, but maybe we don't have a way of anchoring that into reality. And so you've started to, not only with your book, but you've also started some other projects that I think is going to be monumental and very helpful for individuals and families to start to spread this less dogmatic and more loving approach to mankind and ourselves. And so before we get into all the details, I love to start off with the opening question so that people can get to know you maybe on a little bit of a personal level as well. How would you describe your current relationship with yourself?
I would describe it as pretty good currently. I see some hope for the disparate parts of myself to find common ground, to find unity. Just this week, I've been sitting with the concept of peace and noticing how one interpretation of it is like joining different parts together. And so if that definition is true, then you have to have difference when you have peace. Like, difference is required to have peace, because you have many different parts that are joined in a whole. And so just thinking about myself, I have a lot of self-criticism, a lot of anxious feelings, and maybe some perfectionism that can surface. And just this week, I've been sitting with the idea of listening for what the wisdom of those various voices is offering. Like, what is the wisdom of anxiety? What is the wisdom of perfectionism? Or what is the wisdom of critical voice? And to not let that voice take the reins, to not dominate myself, but to say, you're welcome. You're offering a lot of gifts. You're offering a lot of wisdom, and you're welcome to be at the table along with everybody else in the effort to find inner peace. And so it's a concept that I've been sitting with this week, especially for a variety of reasons. But just that framing has already given me some hope to say, like, I don't have to pretend like those parts don't exist. I don't have to like annihilate those parts or stifle those parts. They can be part of the symphony of the self, and kind of live in harmony.
Oh, that's so good. I love that you're, that analogy that I've heard that I feel like would be in parallel with that is, we do have all these parts about ourselves, but so often we only want to fixate on the things that are good maybe of ourselves and completely ignore or shove in the corner these dark shadow sides of
Hmm.
ourselves.
Yeah.
But if you think about it as a whole unit, a family, if you're having a dinner and are you only going to invite half of the family to the dinner table and ignore the rest, the ones that are being ignored are actually going to get louder. They're
Mm.
going to want to be seen. They're going to want to be, noticed. And so for me, I'm beginning to learn more and more that by going to the dark side of things, the more I can start to accept my human nature, more I can accept and see and nurture and hold these parts of myself, the less I am controlled by them, and the more I'm able to actually move into a space that is what I ultimately want more and more. Now, granted, I'm going to toggle back and forth. I'm human,
Hmm.
and I think that's the beauty in the game of life.
Right.
But I really love what that one you're sitting with a theme potentially that you
Hmm.
want to ponder and get a deeper clarity. And so I want to ask: is this part of a meditation then that you're doing, or is this?
It is, yeah. I lead a monthly mindfulness group, meditation group, and so the topic for this coming meetup is going to be peace. So it's kind of related to the season, the holiday season, and so figuring out how to talk about peace in a way that doesn't feel so tired. Sometimes, oh yeah, peace, sure, everybody wants peace, yeah, yeah, blah blah blah, right?
Mhm.
It's like, no, how can we really make it rigorous and kind of make peace challenging? Like the fact is that if we were to survey everybody across the planet, it's likely that almost everybody would say, yeah, I want peace, but we don't have it. Like we don't have it politically, we don't have it internally, and so why is that? Why do we say we want it? Everybody agrees we want it, and then we fall short of getting it, and so that kind of troubles the situation, troubles the question, and makes it more interesting. And so yeah, it's part of a meditative practice and a meditative group.
Okay. Um, we're going to circle back to this
Okay.
because before we go into that, I think that it's really good to give the listeners maybe some background and perspective of how you've gotten to where you are right now.
Hmm.
And so, how I came across you was you're the author of When Mormons Doubt.
Hmm.
And, one thing that why it resonated so much is you discuss this universal framework of ideals of truth, beauty, and goodness for navigating faith and relationships. And so, can you explain to me how you started that book?
Hmm. Yeah, it started. um, it's hard to know the exact moment that it started. I grew up LDS. I had a faith crisis when I was a missionary in California, and struggled through that. When I returned home, I decided that I was just going to focus on college and dating. But then when I graduated from college, my youngest sister and my best friend from high school left the LDS church, and so I started getting back into some of the questions that I'd been having on my mission, the really complicated, gnarly questions. And over the course of a lot of reading and research, I was like, oh, uh, the dominant narrative of the church isn't true. Like um, that was a realization that kind of took me by surprise at the time. And I realized, like, oh, what do I do? You know?
And for really quick, anyone that's listening that's maybe not familiar with that dominant narrative, what would
Yeah.
you categorize that narrative to be?
Yeah. It's a good question. That phrase, the dominant narrative of the church isn't true, comes from Richard Bushman, who's a historian. Uh, he's a Mormon historian, and he's still active in the church. And so, in saying that, I don't mean to say like, therefore somebody should leave or somebody should stay. I'll just caveat with that. I will say that the dominant narrative of the church being true, like one example is growing up I saw artwork of Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon, and it was like the golden plates, and he's using a Urim and Thummim, and he's like translating it word by word. And what Richard Bushman talks about, and many other historians talk about, is like, oh, Joseph Smith looked into a hat and looked at a rock and translated it that way. And so the dominant narrative, being the one that I saw growing up, that's just one example of the dominant narrative. That dominant narrative is actually a lot more complicated than what I grew up thinking. And there are many other examples that I could go into, but it's just like so many of the things that just became part of the culture
Mhm.
are more complicated than the primary or the approach that you would take to for a young child. And so growing up, it's like, oh, okay, there's a lot of nuance here. It's very complicated, and it's not as simple and pat as I grew up to believe. That's what I mean by that.
Great. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
So when it comes to the book, how did you, when the three main kind of universal values that you talk about it in this book is truth, beauty, and goodness. And, uh, you know, I want to dive in just for a brief moment on what those mean to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but the overall arching theme of the book is how do we save relationships, whether you're in not just LDS religion, any religion, have family or friends that are, either not religious or people that are kind of in between or have left, et cetera. A lot of times these types of dynamics can really rip, relationships apart.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I loved what you're doing is like, rather than focus on our differences, what are we all searching for, and what's the common ground here? And we all want these three things,
Yeah.
truth, beauty, and goodness.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, how would you describe those three values?
Yeah, they're very difficult to describe. I see them as directions to head in or attitudes to have. But philosophers go back and forth about defining these words and have gone back and forth about defining these words for eons, right? As long as there have been philosophy, there have been debates about these words. Personally, I'll just say that I define it as intellectual exercise, spiritual exercise, and like community exercise. And maybe even that falls quite short. But it's like, in truth, would be the pursuit of intellectual rigor. You're able to think about logic and to not make logical fallacies and to learn the facts as best as you can possibly learn them. So you're headed in that direction. You have an attitude or disposition to say, you know what, if I encounter new evidence, I'm going to change my mind. That's an attitude that leads you closer to truth. Beauty is about spiritual experience. And so could be beauty through a film, beauty through artwork, beauty through music, beauty through a church service. Any of these means to have a heart experience, where you are emotionally transformed. You have a sense of transcendence with whatever medium you encounter that does that for you. And then goodness would be, how do I live in community? How do I be a good citizen? How do I be a good parent? How do I be a good friend? How do I be a good neighbor? How do I mourn with those who mourn? Any number of things like that. And so that's how I would define them, with the caveat that anybody could have any number of disagreements with how I define it, and that could be interesting as well.
Yeah.
I don't say that anybody else's definition is incorrect. That just is a useful working definition for me.
One thing I'm noticing a lot with your work and just talking with you too is this word pride can have multiple meanings, but one thing that I've come across that I see often is when we have a lot of pride in our thoughts and beliefs, in our narratives, it's drawing a line in the sand, creating separation. And to me, that invites attack versus saying, okay, I'm right, you're wrong. And then now all of a sudden we're forced to defend our side, and we're not really allowing for growth to really happen and understanding to happen
Mhm.
on either end. And so something that I really respect is you're willing to share your current stance and opinion, but there's also an openness to saying, I don't have all the answers. Here's what I've found thus far in my research, in my own ponderings, but I'm not so uh, you know rigid in my opinions that I'm not willing to actually look and really hear and try and understand another person's reality.
Mhm.
So thank you for that, because I think that is a skill set that is much needed in this day and age amongst adults, and then to teach our kids this way of interacting too.
Mhm.
So and with that, since it's been how many years since you wrote the book?
8.
8 years. With time passing, more experience, would you add anything that is quote unquote missing to truth, beauty, and goodness? Would you add another word in there or anything like that that you feel doesn't encapsulate as much of what now you're kind of feeling?
It's a good question. I don't know if I would add anything to the trio, truth, beauty, and goodness, because it's been a pretty solid trio for a long time in the philosophical tradition, and so it's pretty set as a trio. But since writing the book, and even a little bit before publishing the book, I've been involved in a group called Lower Lights. It's a meditation group, and so I've been to many meditation retreats, 1 day retreat, 3 day retreat, 7 day retreats, and have just spent a lot of time in that practice. I'm by no means an expert in this practice, but one word that I would add as a complement to the trio would be presence.
Hmm.
Can you can you be present to what's here? It's incredibly difficult. Finding truth, beauty, and goodness is incredibly difficult, and being present is incredibly difficult. I still struggle with it immensely, even though I've spent a fair amount of time in meditation. As soon as I sit down on my laptop or I get on my phone, it's like, boom, I'm just kind
Same.
of, oh, this thing, this notification, that notification, oh, this thing is interesting, going down this rabbit hole. And so presence is like a continual practice that I think could help with the pursuit of truth, and it can help with the pursuit of beauty, and it can help with the pursuit of goodness. So many of the times that we go wrong, it's because we're not fully present in those pursuits.
I would
So
agree
I've
with
add
that.
that.
Yeah. So actually, I want to ask this because you're the second person um, in the last week that has been bringing up meditation retreats,
Hmm.
and it's resonating more and more for me. Even though I've done, you know, on average like a 10 to 15 minute meditation on a daily
Mhm.
basis, but starting to begin to get more interested and flex that muscle of like, okay, sit in silence a little bit longer. Where have you gone for these 1 day, 3 day, 7 day retreats? And is it been local in Utah or has it been out of state?
I've primarily done it through Lower Lights, which is led by a guy named Thomas McConkey. He's been meditating for 25 years or so, so he's well practiced. And so he did live here. He currently lives in Boston. I don't know where he's going to go after Boston, but he's going to be moving somewhere. So when he was here, it was here. A lot of the retreats have also been in Oregon, just outside of Portland. We'll do a lot of the 7 day retreats, like at a lodge. Who actually one of my co-founders at Uplift Kids, that we'll get to, owns, and so we do a lot of things there. Um, I'm trying to think of where the other ones were. There's a place downtown Salt Lake that's a Episcopal church that we often will do the retreats at. And so a variety of places, but it's primarily been through Lower
Lower
Lights.
Lights.
Uh-huh.
So can you briefly tell me what Lower Lights, like a little bit more detail for
Sure.
people that are interested?
Yeah. It's a mindfulness and adult development organization. And so it asks, how can we grow up? How can we grow up? How can we be like more expansive? How can we be more loving and generous? And Thomas does a lot with adult development theory, which is like stages of faith, if you've ever heard of that.
I don't
It's
know.
like different research about how people can be more expansive in their approach to spirituality and religion, um, and just the world at large. And so that's a big part of it. Um, and then another big part of it, the bigger part actually, is the meditation, which is um, pulling a lot from Zen Buddhism and other forms of Buddhism, but then also weaving in Christian contemplative practice. There's a meditative tradition within Christianity itself that often is pretty muted and forgotten about, but it has been going on for, more than 1,000 years. And so weaving in Buddhism and Christianity primarily with some Sufism and Taoism and a bit of Hinduism as well. So it pulls from all the world wisdom traditions.
Hmm. What does your daily practice look like?
It changes based on the day. I really like a quote from a Catholic priest who said, he used the word prayer, but he says, pray as you can and not as you can't. And that means like, don't worry so much about um, conforming yourself to a particular way of doing meditation or prayer if it is not enlivening for you. And so if I sit down and, most of the time it's like follow the breath and be aware of sensation in the body and note what you see, hear, and feel. And this is a practice that comes from a guy named Shinzen Young, who is well versed in Buddhism. And so you just a noting practice, an awareness practice. What thoughts are going through your mind? That would be see internally, or that'd be images. What images are going through your mind? That would be see internally. What thoughts are going through your mind? That would be hear internally. Hearing with the ear, internally, and then what feelings, emotions are going through your body. And so it's just an awareness practice. What's here today? What's present? If that's not working, then I might even go to like even a pretty formal petitionary prayer. It might just be, I'm just going to pray. May I be more generous? May I be kinder today? May I be a better father? That kind of thing. And I just might have that be my prayer practice. And so it is a sensing in to what's alive and present, and then being willing to have some flexibility with what's alive and present.
Thank you for that. Because yeah, I know that for some, talking to people over the years, the idea of just sitting in silence, watching the breath, it just doesn't resonate, right? And
Sure.
so
Yeah.
I love that there's a willingness to be like, it doesn't have to look a certain way, like tune in, try something, and tweak if needed. And don't be afraid also to abandon and don't do that one again if it just doesn't even work for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I do love that, your willingness to experiment is really neat. So um, how one thing you wrote to me, and I've listened to a couple of your other interviews and podcasts, and in an email you said I would love to focus on something called expansive spirituality. So how did kind of from going from the book springboard into this idea or concept of expansive spirituality?
Yeah. It started because I was just interested after a faith crisis, just interested in asking, well, what is the root of spirituality? If I one option when discovering that your religion isn't what you thought it was is to reject and exclude that religion, to be hostile towards it and just say like, oh, it's all garbage, right? That didn't feel particularly wise to me. It felt like, no, there's a lot of wisdom that has been hard earned within Mormonism. And there are a lot of things that don't sit as well with me as they once did. And so I kind of looking from that perspective, I was like, oh, I think that's the same thing that's happening in all traditions. But all the traditions are pointing to something. And so that's where it gets to this expansive spirituality. It's not a rejection of any single tradition or being particularly hostile to any particular tradition, though there might be some exceptions like abuse within traditions. You might say like, no, I'm going to put a hard line. If somebody's facing that kind of situation, complete I have complete empathy for somebody in that situation. Um, but generally speaking, various traditions around the world are trying to get to wisdom. And so, what can we learn across traditions? And what's the root of what they're pointing to, the heart of what they're pointing to? And so it came slowly, even before my major faith crisis. This was back in like 2013. I was reading the Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism, which is a scriptural text that's really quite moving. The Tao Te Ching and Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and just seeing like, oh, there's a ton of wisdom in a lot of traditions around the world, and that's what I mean by expansive spirituality, is like listening for how wisdom is appearing across all these traditions.
Why do you feel like it's fairly common? And I wouldn't doubt if this is true amongst other religions. My only really experience is through LDS religion. But for people that tend to be quite devout, there is, uh, from my observation, there they want to continue to only study through maybe the approved books
Mm-hmm.
of that
Mm-hmm.
organization, whether it is the Bible, the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, or whatever other sacred texts that they prescribe to. They keep coming back to it, and I can understand. Yes, it's good to do that, but it seems like there's this underlying fear of
Mm-hmm.
looking outside of that for additional information. Where do you think that stems from?
I think there's something wise in that. And it is a fear that they're going to lose community. Like, how am I going to still be friends with the people I'm friends with in my ward, in my congregation? How am I going to still have a relationship with my parents and siblings or my children? Uh, because so much of our conversation is centered around the church. And so if I open that possibility, I might be putting all of that at risk. And so there's something deep inside somebody that's saying, hey, be careful. You know, this is a threshold that you should be concerned about crossing. And so I think that there's wisdom in that, in saying, be careful. Because it is a tough road. Once you open yourself up to the possibility that somebody in India is just as human as you are, and if you had been born there, you would believe their beliefs. Once you open yourself up to that possibility, then it's like, oh, I gotta take my worldview pretty lightly. I gotta hold it, with a bit of distance, because if I'd grown up anywhere else, I would also be gripping to it.
That's
Uh,
wise.
yeah. So.
That's really wise. You mentioned, and I didn't make notes on it, so I apologize if my ability to articulate this question well, but you stated in a previous podcast kind of this different stages. It's from someone else that where there's simplicity.
Mhm.
Can you kind of?
Yeah.
I feel like this kind of
Oh
coincides with
yeah.
this as well. Could you maybe
Yeah.
elaborate on that?
This is stages. This is what I was pointing to. So, somebody named James Fowler did a bunch of research. Tons of other people have done research on adult development theory. And so, James Fowler's one. Ken Wilber is another one. Uh, Terry O'Fallon is one that Thomas pulls from. But this one that you're pointing to, I personally really like, because it's so easy to understand quickly. And it comes from a former pastor named Brian McLaren. He wrote a book called Faith After Doubt that I find really moving. I highly recommend this book. And he has a 4-stage model. So he says, when you're growing up and you're in your culture, you tend to have a simple worldview. Our guys are right, their guys are wrong. If you're in the church, thumbs up. If you're out of the church, I'm a little scared of you, right? So this is the way it happens essentially for everybody. As you grow up, you have this simple worldview. My family's good. Other families, I'm not so sure about, generally speaking. And then as you grow up, you get into complexity, which is the second stage of the 4 stages. Complexity is when you start to see, oh, wait a second. those guys over there are actually saying something that is kind of wise. And so you see this currently in the LDS church quite frequently. If you're in a congregation or you're in a Sunday school or in an elders quorum relief society, you'll hear people who will cite people who aren't LDS. C.S. Lewis, or like I'm reading Brene Brown, any number of people, who are just generally saying things that are wise but aren't LDS. So that's complexity. We're like, they're onto something, but you still would say, but ours is the best in complexity. There's wisdom out there, but ours is the best. The third stage is perplexity, when you hit this phase of like, oh man, I don't know. I don't know who's right, who's wrong. Like, I'm so confused. What I thought was the truth turns out to be way more complicated than I had supposed. I don't know what to do. I don't know which way is up, which way is down. I feel very lost. And Brian McLaren talks about how people in this stage tend to be kind of isolated. They're like, I kind of have to go through this alone. They feel very lonely because, like, does anybody else understand me? Can I trust anybody else? This thing that I thought was 100% true isn't 100% true. And it can be it's the dark night of the soul. It can be very, very hard to go through the stage of perplexity. Then Brian McLaren says that the fourth stage is harmony. And in harmony, you can kind of circle back and be like, okay, I still don't know exactly what is absolutely true and absolutely false, but I can see that some things are truer than other things. And I can see that there is still goodness here to some degree. And so even though I can't answer all of the questions, I'm going to try to take gifts from simplicity. I'm going to try to take gifts from complexity, and I'm going to try to take gifts from perplexity and harmonize those into a new way of being in the world. And so that could look like somebody who is still active in their church congregation, and it can look like somebody who has left their church congregation. They could both be in harmony. It's not about are you in or are you out on the surface level. Once you plumb into the depths, you can be like, oh, this person's in harmony and they're active in their church. This person is in harmony and they've left the church. You're no longer thinking in that binary in or out. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And this actually, what came to mind is harmony could be another way of saying peace.
Totally.
Right?
Yep.
You're merging these
Exactly.
different parts
Exactly.
and stitching them together to kind of say, okay, where's the goodness and where's the commonality?
Mm-hmm.
How can I utilize all these things to now navigate more wholly versus so separately and rigidly?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a beautiful tie-in. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So for you, you've mentioned worshiping. What does healthy worshiping look like to you?
Yeah, it's a question that I don't know if I have a super good answer for. I will say that because it's a living question for me, an ongoing question for me. But it's a question that I'm honestly very interested in, is how to get back to worship in a healthy way and not a dogmatic, my God is the God, who is going to crush all other gods, that kind of way. But worship to me currently is about bowing your head, like being humble, realizing like there's something bigger than me, whether it's all of humanity, whether it's death, whether it's justice, whether it's God, whether it's silence, whatever it is. Like, I have to be in awe of the transcendent, and that could fit if you're a non-believer or a believer. But I have to be in awe, and I have to bow my head and be humble in the face of the greatness that is beyond my little individual self. And so worship is that posture of bowing your head and having humility and reverence.
That's beautiful. So, with as we gain more life experience, very common for us to have skepticism for anything, again, that is different than what we maybe grew up with, etc. What does healthy skepticism look like to you?
I think healthy skepticism is coupled with beauty and goodness. So if I say that skepticism leads us closer to truth, I would bring in beauty and goodness. Another way to talk about this is head, heart, and hands. And so head would be skeptical. I'm going to be rigorous in my thinking.
Mhm.
But if I'm just rigorous in my thinking, I can become a total jerk. I can be like, "Oh, you don't know. Actually, you're an idiot." Right? That kind of thing. That kind of thing. But if I couple it with beauty and goodness, or if I couple it with heart, knowing and being in the world and trying to be a decent person, not a jerk, uh, then that can be healthy skepticism. I have my doubts about this, but I'm willing to actually hear what you're saying and to try to sense who you are at the level beyond the words, like at the level of the heart. I'm willing to be here with you, and I'm willing to sacrifice for you. And so to me, that's healthy skepticism. Healthy skepticism is a skepticism that isn't just about skepticism, it isn't just about winning an argument. It sees that human beings are complex, and it's not just about, we're not machines, like computing
Mhm.
right answer, wrong answer.
Yeah.
There's some heartfulness to it.
Yeah. Thanks for answering that. And so, with all of this information that to me resonates really, really, I mean, a ton. I have two children. Sounds like you have children.
Hmm.
And one thing that is common that I've seen is as people begin to go into um, perplexity,
Hmm.
in their journey of life, and we begin to kind of abandon our maybe what was our footing for a long time, then the question is, well, what am I teaching my children? What morals or values that I tied into this that are good, but because I tie into them, or this is tied into something that now I'm really unsure of, I'm unsure of even where to even navigate how to teach, my kids and how to even act myself in some ways. So something you've started is you're a co-founder of Uplift Kids.
Hmm.
Um, and how did this start and what is it?
It started through a 9-month program that I did with Lower Lights. And so it was
Okay.
9 months. We met 5 days over the course, 5 days, 4 different times over the course of 9 months in Oregon. And then between each 5 day session, we had a bunch of stuff that we did. And the more that we were doing it, the more we were like, it was the same cohort of 20 people. So there were a few of us in the cohort. We're like, really like what we're doing here, but what can we do to translate some of this for children? Because there are no children in the cohort. There's no children in Lower Lights. It's a meditation group. It doesn't mix well with kids. There's a reason that like monasteries are there are a bunch of celibates because you don't want kids running around. It ruins the meditation. But it's like still really important. How do you bring children into it and have expansive spirituality for kids? So the more we talked about it, the more we were like, okay, what kind of form could this take to reach children? And we came up with a bunch of ideas. Eventually settled on like in-home lessons. If you're LDS, you would know of family home evening, and so this is like family home evening or home church where you get together and you talk about a topic for 20, 30 minutes. And so we said, what would it look like to create a curriculum that families could use to have structure in presenting structure and guidance in presenting expansive spirituality? And we pull from the wisdom traditions around the world and psychological research. And we started with a prototype of 6 families. We said, hey, just families and friends. We said, hey, do you want to try this? They tried it. We did a bunch of iterations based on their feedback, and we did another prototype with 36 families after that. Got their feedback, did a bunch of iterations, and then did a soft launch, and have continued to iterate. At this point, we have 3 years worth of lessons, and we're ready to start moving into other directions, additional directions. But that 3 years worth of content is still being used, and will continue to be used as families who have bought it continue to use it, and new families continue to buy it.
Is there a lesson that has been your favorite?
Um,
or that you tend to go back to or think about?
there's so many. One that stands out is polarities, and polarities are complementary opposites. And so this is something that I've been sitting with for many years. 15 to 20 years ago, I was like, when I would teach in church, I would realize like, oh, the lesson is way more interesting if you find a value and a complementary value. So it'd be like kindness and honesty. Because if you just talk about kindness, everybody's kind of nodding their head. Yeah, 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 yeah. But if you bring in honesty to complement it, then it's like, okay, when do these two become in conflict?
Hmm.
When are you too when you're too honest, you're too blunt? Sometimes you can be not kind. But if you're too kind, then sometimes you can be deceiving. You can be nice
Mm.
and be deceptive. And so where's the right balance, or where is it appropriate to lean into one or the other of these? That's a way more interesting conversation
Yeah.
than just honesty or just kindness in itself. And so other polarities would be like uh, courage and caution. So courage is good, but if you're too courageous, you end up being reckless. And caution is good, but if you're too cautious, you end up being paralyzed. You don't do anything. And so, how do you find the right balance or the right blend of courage and caution? And what does that look like in your life to find the appropriate blend of these? That kind of conversation is it's one of the foundations of Uplift, and it spills over into all the other lessons. But it really is something that you can attune your kids to, over time. We say any virtue held too tightly becomes a vice. So it's not about just holding to one virtue. You actually have to hold complementary virtues
Mm.
together.
I love that. Yeah, because I mean, it's especially with kids, usually our teachings with kids are very black and white because it's very
Right.
simple, right?
Yeah.
But it seems like you guys are doing a good job on weaving in this ability to start to introduce a third option, I guess, in
Yeah.
there, and that's important. I'm just sitting with that for a moment. So, what's been your feedback with Uplift Kids?
It's been really positive. Families continue to say that they really enjoy doing the lessons, that they have just really appreciated having some structure
Mm.
where they felt like they didn't have any structure. Many families use it who have left the LDS church. Many families use it who are in a mixed faith marriage, and one partner is still active and the other partner is no longer active in a religion. And so this is common ground. I don't want to, they'll say like, I don't want to do the curriculum from the church. My partner doesn't want to do that, but we can agree to do Uplift Kids together. And so it's a way that rather than sitting down and having an argument between parents, in front of the kids about different beliefs, it's like, no, we want to do it. We want to do this lesson on grit, and we want to teach you how to have grit in your life. We can both agree about that. And so there's that. And then finally, the third group is people who are in religion but are just looking for something more expansive. They want to introduce their kids to Taoism or to Stoicism or to Hinduism, and so help their kids have a spiritual passport to see like, oh, there's wisdom around the world. We happen to belong to this particular tradition, but we're not scared of knowing that there's wisdom elsewhere too.
Has there been anything surprising over the last 3 years since this has been out that you didn't see surfacing that you're just like, oh wow, okay, this is maybe you have a huge atheist subscription side of
Yeah.
things, or people often maybe in a European country where they're not LDS background, maybe they're
Mhm.
Catholic or whatever. You just kind of see that subscriptions are starting to
Yeah.
people are. Is there anything like that, or what
Yeah,
has
there
stood out?
is. It's actually the opposite of that. Though we do have lots of people who are atheist and will say like, I've left religion. I'm so glad to have this. I've been surprised at how many people who are still actively in religion who really appreciate this.
Hmm.
And so when we were starting out, we were like, do we position ourselves as like post-religious? We don't really feel like we are necessarily post-religious. But maybe that's the best way to position this. But we found pretty quickly that there were just so many families who were like still going to church and really appreciated what we're doing. And so it's kind of put us in a bit of a tough spot because uh, we could probably reach more people in the short term if we just declared one side of that or the other. If we said, like, we're the post religious organization. But like what we're trying to do is bring about the harmony that Brian McLaren is talking about. And because of that, we're sticking to that principle, especially after seeing how many people who say, like, I still go to church and I really appreciate Uplift. And so it's like, okay, well, that's good on the one hand because that means that we are hitting into this harmony where you could have belief or non-belief and still appreciate what we're doing.
Yeah. So, you've mentioned this earlier too, of fear of why people tend to not look outside of their religion is the community side of things. Have you found it difficult to find a community of people to gather together without then becoming cliquish?
Yeah.
Or,
I would say it's the difficulty that we've had is getting people together. I don't feel like we're at the point of being cliquish yet because we're so hands off and non dogmatic. I think that there's a balance to be struck there, and if we haven't hit the balance yet, it's because we've been like so hands off and so non dogmatic. But we do have a group of people who has met once a month, 8 to 10 families here in Utah Valley on a Sunday morning once a month to do an uplift lesson together. And it's been wonderful. Like we've met really cool people through that. Like,
where do you do that?
In the summer months, we do it in a park. We just do the lesson and then the kids run around in the park and the grown-ups talk. And there's so many cool people who come, people who I really appreciate. And then in the winter months, it's a bit trickier because now we've gotten so big that we can't just be in somebody's house. And so maybe that's the part where it's like, well, if we rent a space out, then it's going to be more formal. And if it's more formal, then we get closer to dogma, like we don't want to be hands-on. We want to be hands-off, but a community really does need somebody who's hands-on to say, like, here's some structure. It's what we're wrestling with. But so far, I don't feel like there's any sense of it feeling cliquish, which has been nice. It's just very informal.
Okay. And can people that are listening, is it just through Instagram that you post those gatherings? Is it?
We don't even post them officially because we reach people across the nation. And so it'd be tricky for us to say, like, in Utah County, come and meet. Yeah. They're like, there obviously we have a fair number of people who are using Uplift in Utah County. But it would just feel weird to so many of our other users. But we just have, it was actually started by an Uplift Kids member who's just like, I want to start this. And we have pointed people in that direction saying, like, here are some resources if you want to start your own. And this person responded, started it, and my family started going with it too. And so the little group is on Facebook, Utah, Uplift Kids Utah County, I think it's called. And so that's how people find it.
I wonder if anyone listening that lives outside would be like, oh, I'll start a chapter in my region or whatever.
That's what we hope. We hope that families will say, you know what, we're going to start a little pod of people with close friends. It tends to work best if you're like, you know what, our 3 families are pretty close to each other. Let's just gather together and do a simple uplift lesson a Sunday once a month. And that's the best way to start it. It's like you're already organic friends. It's just like a new thing to add into the mix of your friend group. And it's fun and gives your kids a touch point. And the thing that I love about it is that I want my kids to hear from other grownups. I want them to hear the perspectives of other grownups. And so you just rotate through who's teaching. And my kids get to hear a bunch of people who are teaching uplift lessons in different ways.
That sounds healthy.
Yeah.
What have you learned about yourself through this process of starting this?
Let's see. I would say, hmm, I'd say that I have definitely learned how much I need other people. Perhaps many people can relate to this because of remote work. Um, Remote work is amazing. It's so nice. Like even before we were starting this,
Yeah.
you're saying like it's so nice to be able to work remotely yourself,
Yeah.
or just like work close to home.
Yeah.
And so I love that aspect of it, but it can be isolating. And so I would say that, my co-founders live in outside of Portland, Oregon, and I live here. And so we do once a week call for Uplift to record our podcast and to talk about Uplift and where we're doing and the tasks for the week. But aside from that, I'm just kind of working on a laptop, and I like the work, and I like the questions I'm exploring, but it can be isolating. And so I've had to counteract that by trying to be more proactive in my community. And so a lesson that I've learned in doing this is like um, it's it's been amazing to find a cause that I care about, and yet it's not enough to just be in a cause that you care about. For me, I also have to be interacting with people face to face. That's really important.
That's good. So kind of a combination of introverted and extroverted.
Yeah. Uh huh. Yep.
Yeah. So I see that you have lots of notes actually in front of you. Is there anything that you have been eager to express that maybe you haven't been able to express so far that you feel would be beneficial for anyone listening? Because for me, like all of this information is hopeful, it's enlightening, it's
Mm-hmm.
intriguing, and so and just the amount of research and work that you and the others that are involved are putting into this. Um, I want to make sure that if I have you here, let's make the use make use of your voice, and that might be helpful to someone.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, is there anything on there that you feel like we haven't touched on yet?
I feel like we've touched on most of it. I will say maybe just to distill a point,
Yeah.
which is that I feel like it's so important for people to have a good mix of warmth and structure. And I talk about this right at the beginning of the book, When Mormons Doubt. There was a atheist named Elaine de Botton who wrote a book called Religion for Atheists. And when he was promoting the book, he thought like, oh, nobody in Utah is going to be interested in the book. But he found it was just the opposite. That like book sales were, I think it was 8 times higher in Utah than other places. And because the book talks about how important religion is, even for a non-believer, meaning the structure of religion, like having a weekly reminder and having a place to go and having ritual. These things like really ground humanity and have you feel like you belong in a place.
Hmm.
And so I would just say that for those who have very legitimate questions about religion, I would just say not to lose sight of structure of some kind, some discipline and structure to say, like, we're still going to be doing X, Y, and Z coupled with warmth. Because sometimes what can happen is that when somebody lets go of religion, it can be so freeing. Oh, now I'm not held down by those shackles. People will say, I'm so happy now that I have my Sundays open. People will say that kind of thing, um, which is all valid. But I would just say, don't forget that that structure is useful and it came through some hard earned insight to say like structure can be a really good thing for human beings and a really good thing for families and a really good thing for kids. And so how can you implement some kind of structure and discipline so that people can grow up and have community and feel like they have ground in their life? So just a note about the importance of structure. coupled again with warmth, because structure without warmth is dogma. It's callous. It's heartless. So structure and warmth.
Okay. I that's I like that a lot. So you mentioned that you have a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? What is the name of that?
Uplift Kids podcast.
Uplift Kids.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
And is that weekly?
Yeah.
Weekly?
Yeah.
Do you, is it all three, like the co-founders, or is it just
Yep.
you?
Me, Amanda, and Michelle. Amanda's a school psychologist and Michelle's a therapist. And so the three of us talk about the topic for the week.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if someone is interested in finding out more information, what's the best place to go and look up Uplift Kids or your podcast?
Yeah.
Where would they go?
Upliftkids.org.
.org. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything, this is a question I love to add at the very end, is there anything that you hope that someone listening today will take away, in your opinion? Like, what's the most important thing?
Mm-hmm. I think the thing that I am most attuned to is how can we have healthy spirituality that can transcend and include what came before, rather than reject and exclude. So I'm most concerned about Utah Valley because that's where I live. I really want Utah Valley to grow up in a healthy way so that whether somebody is in the church or out of the church, we're trying to have more love and acceptance, and also bring that element of rigor. Maybe another way to say it is like, I wouldn't want us to leave behind any of the things that have come from our lineage, like our forebears. I think there's a lot of things that have been very valuable. And so to transcend the limitations and the shortcomings, certainly transcend those limitations and shortcomings and biases and prejudices, transcend all that, but include the wisdom of the forebears. Don't reject that wisdom, whether you stay in religion or out or leave religion.
What would you, if you could shoot from the hip, what's some of the wisdom from, your LDS upbringing? Would you?
Yeah, if you listen to almost every single interview I've ever heard from somebody who grew up LDS and left, it almost every time it starts with, I loved growing up as a young person in the LDS community. I love this aspect, at the very least. I love this aspect of growing up. Whether it be like singing hymns or whether it be like youth camp. I loved the feeling that I belonged to something. And that is hard to do and shouldn't be discounted lightly. We're trying to do that. We have Uplift Family Camp. And so we're trying to weave that in and bring that along, but it is very hard to do. And so that's some of the wisdom is like the community. I would say a lot of the word of wisdom, like healthy living, a lot of it is sound. And let me think of what other aspects, like the weekly reminder to step up.
Yeah,
like
a sacrament. Is that what you're referring
sacrament?
to?
Yeah. It's your weekly reminder, weekly ritual. To hear other people in a conversation talking about how can I be a better person, which doesn't always happen at church, but ideally that's what church conversations would be, is like, how do I be a more generous person? So those are some of the things, like that rhythm and ritual that I think shouldn't be discounted lightly.
That's so good. Well, Jon, I thank you for joining me today and taking time out of your Friday. And it being Friday the 13th, I was like, ooh, is this going to be superstitious?
I didn't even know, yeah.
But no, it's turned out fantastic. So, I encourage anyone that is listening, Uplift Kids, I've looked through the curriculum and stuff, and it's really, I think, just poignant and important for at least someone just to go to the page and look through it and just have that as in their back pocket as something that they could turn to if they feel at some point they need. So thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.